Hello, and a very warm welcome to the Property and Investor Podcast. As you know, my name is Paul Lanfear. I'm your host. And before we get into the podcast, the usual health warning applies. Nothing in the podcast is investment advice, legal advice, health advice. Obviously, you'll do your own due diligence, but you know that by now. Nick, thanks for coming on the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Feels like a long time this podcast has been on the I think I've had 9 to 12 month wait, and I'm excited that we've finally found the window to do it. So thank you very much for coming on. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, same.
So these are the origin story podcasts. So there's plenty we could discuss about business, about coaching, your property events, loads of property stuff. But I like to start at the beginning if we can and kind of work out like how have we got here and like where are we coming from? So tell us about young Nick. I know where were you born? Where did you get started? How do you get off in life?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not that young. It's the lighting that makes the difference. Yeah, my background, first chapter of my life was grew up in Yorkshire.
Hmm.
And I know you can tell by the accent. I had a pretty standard upbringing, kind of blended family, was outside a lot
Hmm.
doing outdoory stuff. School relatively middle of the road, and I finished school and I thought, I'll do physics, maths, A levels, and a few other bits. And I started that and realized academic route wasn't really for me. I was doing okay with it, but yeah, I thought, well, I'll try and do something a bit more vocational. So I went into the army recruitment office to join the parachute regiment, and the like engineering recruiting officer behind the desk was very much like, no, you don't want to do that, you don't want to do that, you want to become an engineer, you can have a trade, and you can you can do all that stuff as well. And actually he was right. I did manage to kind of like qualify when I hopped into the military when I was kind of 17. um and yeah, went through kind of like quite a well-trodden path, a strong process of training and kind of different postings, and yeah, it was an amazing career.
And do you remember like, what the catalyst was for like that decision? So, for example, was it that you'd seen a family member go down that path? Was it because that's quite a big decision, isn't it? And think about a 17-year-old is to leave their family home and sign up for, potentially a long career in the military.
Yeah. One thing about my personality is I don't tend to sweat the big stuff. The
Okay.
small stuff I'll procrastinate over, whereas the big stuff I'm just like, yeah, it is what it is. I mean, there's two answers to that. One is this is only kind of like looking back, but interestingly, my grandfather, was a very strong male figure in my life. He was an electrician. He did his national service. He had his own businesses, all sorts of different businesses.
Mhm.
Um, and that's exactly what I did. That's the route kind of I went through. I mean,
Mhm.
that's the first bit of the answer. The second bit was probably something that's carried me forward in business. I always felt like there was something else. I always had an itch. I was kind of adventure, and I saw probably the advertising, and I was like, yeah, I want to travel, and I want to live a life that's kind of fulfilling. I probably didn't use those words at the time, but looking back, that's what I was doing.
Mhm. And uh, so, what was it like in that initial stage? Obviously, 17, you're pretty young. About at 17, my memory is that at 17, I knew everything about the world, and
Yeah.
I didn't have a single doubt in my head. Compare that to being like 50, and it's a very different experience for some reason. But like, what was the 17-year-old Nick's experience like of joining? Were you like a good recruit, or were you a shambles? Was it a
I,
smooth process? Was it hell on earth?
yeah, I probably didn't do that well, actually. Very, very kind of task focused introvert. So I hid. And, when I stood at Huddersfield train station with a bag and a one-way train ticket, and I think they gave you like £20 at the time for your, food and stuff. And I had to head down to the outskirts of London for my training. I was like, yeah, I'll take it. When I started in training, I was actually in a room with three Scottish guys,
Mhm.
broad Glaswegian, and I was in this four-man room, and I just couldn't. I didn't know what they were saying. I couldn't like understand words. So I was quiet, quite quiet. I probably came in the bottom half of the platoon. I remember doing a test, like because I went on to do the engineering afterwards, and I was told I had like a 4% chance of passing the course. Little did they know I came top of the course.
No way.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
that's interesting. So, having been given, let's say, slim odds of passing, how does one go from that to becoming top of the course?
I think I'm a slow starter. It takes me a while to make a decision, but then once I make the decision, I go full on with it. And that's carried on all the way through, through my career, through my life, through everything really. Just I'll be slow and steady and kind of like a diamond in the rough.
Hmm.
And then once I get going with something and I really, I can catch a tailwind, but it just takes a while. What's
Yeah, yeah.
interesting in the military, you kind of change jobs because I joined as a soldier and then, I did 16 years in the military. So I managed to, like, my boss wasn't very good. And I was like, oh, I could do a better job than that. And he was an officer. So I managed to meander my way through to commission and go through Sanders training, the
Mhm.
officer training academy. And then I was like, oh, I really fancy doing a commando unit. And then I was like, well, I'll try and do para training. And, there's always been something ahead.
Hmm.
And it's the same in any kind of corporate career, really. There's always if you're ambitious, there's always a place that you can go.
Hmm.
And what was interesting was I kind of left at the height of my career.
Okay.
That was the point where I almost had Willy Wonka's golden ticket to, you're going to do okay in your
Hmm.
career because of the jobs I'd had and, the kind of experience I'd had. And yeah, that was the real, probably changed the real different point of maybe I felt like I couldn't do much else.
I see. Okay. I suppose that like, how did you know at that point? Because it's very easy with the benefit of hindsight to look back at history and see these. What is it? There's that Tony Robbins thing, isn't it? Life only makes sense. You can only join at the dots in the rearview mirror, like looking backwards over life. It doesn't make sense as you go forwards. But how did you have the feeling that you were at that stage?
I think it's at different points of your military career. When you're a soldier, you've got to be good at the doing stuff. As an officer, as a junior officer, you've got to be good at kind of understanding the question, understanding what's being asked of you, and the next part as a middle ranking officer,
Mhm.
to senior officer, it changes. It turns a little bit more into politics. It turns a little bit more into having the right path and the right trajectory. Now talent will always prevail, but you could be in a job where you had a poor report or whatever happened, like for something out of your control, you don't necessarily make the path
Mhm.
that you kind of should do.
Mhm.
So I think it was a realization of that, and then actually I would rather be able to choose my own path and make my own rules rather than work to something else. And
Yeah.
also I had a kid. My youngest was born as well, and that's quite a that was towards the tail end of my career, probably one of the catalysts, one of the motivations to
Mhm.
I wouldn't mind being around for her a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I mean that makes complete sense, and that is why I one of the motivations for leaving corporate law was
Yeah.
the arrival of my daughter, because it makes you have like it's one of those periods in life where you have one of those reassessments of life. In corporate life, there used to be this phenomenon, I don't know whether this exists in the military, of people being promoted into incompetence. So
Hmm.
they're a really, really good practitioner, like a really good practitioner. So let's say they're an intellectual property lawyer. They are a genius, like they're an actual genius. And then the law firm recognizes this, the billing is really good. So they go, okay, we're going to give you a team now of six junior lawyers. and they hate managing people, and and all the things that made them a success then operate against them. The fact
Yeah.
that they're very locked in, all of that, all of those things. Is that restricted? Is that like just a corporate life phenomenon, or have you seen that in the military world?
Oh no, no, it's massive. I mean, it might have changed a little bit now, but yeah, guys, if they made a mistake, they tend to be the easiest way to move them on is to promote them.
Okay.
So it's the opposite, and then yeah, most people are chasing the wrong thing, and I think it's the same in life. You start off at, there's almost two phases to life. One way you kind of like wanting stuff and taking stuff, and then one way you try and give back.
Hmm.
And some people never cross over those two things, and some people keep taking all their life. Some people start giving and give
Hmm.
their knowledge, give their money away, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's exactly the same with with any kind of organization that people chase the status and their ego and the badge and the car parking space or whatever else you get, the perks of the job, but
Hmm.
actually realizing that you can do something you love, and as long as you've got enough money to do what you need, that creates freedom and choice.
Definitely. I mean, that is pretty much a textbook description of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is, we start off at survival, and everybody does, and that,
Hmm.
well, most people do. And then, as you ascend, and if we look at it in like monetary terms, you acquire more capital, more skills, more contacts, more abilities. You then kind of ultimately, in theory, reach this kind of stage of enlightenment where, you just want to be of service, and
Yeah.
you see that kind of transition.
Self-actualization, isn't it? I would
Yeah.
add Wi-Fi into Maslow's hierarchy of
Yeah,
needs. That needs to be in a
that,
base level as well. But
that
yeah,
that is now a fundamental human need. Um,
yeah.
it strikes me just as an aside, I don't want to take us too far down this cul-de-sac, but I think it is interesting, isn't it, that at all times human beings are trying to meet their needs.
Hmm.
So I've got a really good friend who owns, a big chunk of Yorkshire, and he has recently spent some time putting in en suites into some of his properties. And I've like talked to him about this. It's like, what is the hourly rate for that activity? What is your hourly rate?
Hmm.
What is the difference between the two? Um, and it's fascinating, isn't it? It's that we are all trying to meet our needs, And so if I find it difficult to understand why somebody's necessarily doing something, it's because I don't yet understand what the need is they're trying to meet. Have you ever come across that in your coaching?
Every day. That's
Hey,
why I'm
good.
chuckling. Yeah, so the kind of coaching people, which I've done for many years. I actually have qualifications in coaching, which I didn't realize. Sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't. I actually have qualifications in coaching, which I didn't realize until I've been a coach for about 10 years. Obviously, you go on courses in the military, and then I've
Of
got like
course.
ILM level 7 and some, all these little bits. Yeah, what's the kind of the theme that I see of people? Most people, the problem's not the problem. So
Okay.
most people don't realize kind of, what they're chasing and why they're chasing it at different points of life. That alters as well. And you might set your life up to buy a bigger house or live in a certain place, or, you know, and then that changes
Hmm.
at different points. But most people don't change their life. They're still in the house whilst, the thing that they've pushed for, they want to be mortgage free or whatever. Um, and as they get older, they have to adapt their life to almost like the future self that they want rather than where they are now.
Hmm. Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Um, if we just circle back to kind of your military career, so then how did you find yourself going to Sandhurst? Because that's obviously quite a big step up. That's quite a transitional period, isn't it, in anybody's career? So
Yeah, yeah.
how did that come about?
I think I managed to blag it, but I'm absolutely confident. I had less qualifications than most of my soldiers when I was in the commander soldiers. Uh, but yeah, my career was I was a electronics technician to start off with. and I managed to go and do commando training and a few of the bits of courses. And then, yeah, someone just asked me, I was kind of coming top of my peer group. Everyone gets graded.
Hmm.
And so, someone just mentioned, have you thought about doing this? And I was like, yep, let's do it. And it was really interesting because going from a soldier to an officer, if you just join and go straight to Sandhurst, you go through various, the selection process. Whereas as a soldier, you have like maybe your immediate boss's interview, and then his bosses, and then his bosses, and then so there's about 6 or 7 jumps before you hop onto that mainstream selection.
Hmm.
So you go through your kind of selection boards, and I absolutely prepared like a ninja.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I could tell you like what order I was brought up to answer the questions, how well I was doing. Like really, yeah, I was yeah, preparation was the key to that. And then when I got into Sandhurst, it was it was comfortable. It was the first term is all about soldering, and I'd done that. I'd already been on tour. I'd already had a little bit of experience, and then it moves into kind of critical thinking academics, which is where the first term I tried to help people out where I could, and then the guys that had gone through university, maybe done a master's, then hopped in Sandhurst, directly, they helped me out on the way.
Hmm.
So surround yourself with people that make you better.
Hmm. That sounds like good life advice there, Nick. Um, and then I suppose if a couple of trivial questions, but they just are on my mind. So,
Yeah.
favorite places you've ever visited, not necessarily in the context of like conflict zones, but like favorite places the army has taken you.
Oh gosh, yeah. So many. I mean, I did all the stands and all the sandy, dusty places and everything
Mhm.
in between. Um, Afternoon tea with King of Jordan.
Okay, I think that's understandably high up on the list. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's more. I forget about these little bits and bobs stuff, but I was in Jordan supporting an infantry unit, doing a kind of an exercise, and we're doing an arms and services display where
Mhm.
kind of demonstrating, how tactics work, and sat up on the side of the hill. And I was in charge of the explosives, so I had to press the button, and the explosives went off. And I pressed the button, and about 10 seconds later, it went off.
Oh, no.
And everyone's like paused, and then suddenly there's helicopters coming in firing. But yeah, because of that, and I actually got the king to press the button, and like I was chit chatting to him in my pidgin Arabic, and then he spoke to me in English, and then um, yeah, invited me for afternoon tea. There's about 4 of us went. That was pretty cool. Um, yeah, what else? Been to the palace a few times. What was it? I'm royalty theming here. Probably there's not many sports I've not done.
Okay.
I actually went solo in a glider,
Oh gosh.
which I only saw on a Facebook memory. Once again, I'd forgotten about that.
I mean, that
Um,
takes a lot of courage, doesn't it?
It
And
didn't. It was a Monday morning. It was like, oh, there's a space on a course. By Friday, I was like in Cyprus flying this glider around, and yeah,
sounds absolutely terrifying, Nick. Um, I I once had the pleasure of in corporate life. I used to host this annual dinner, and I had a very interesting guest who was the husband of one of the members of my team, and I was very fortunate to sit next to him. And he does various training for various parts of the military. And I asked him the question. I said, what is the thing that you get people to do, which is like separates the wheat from the chaff that is very challenging. He goes, Paul, it's always exactly the same thing. Obviously, his domain was outdoors, so rope work,
yeah,
caving, and that kind of thing. He said, there's no man alive that you cannot take down potholing and put them in a dark place where they can't move, who does not become scared.
yeah.
And
It's disgusting.
I said, that's amazing. He goes, yeah, all the big units, like all the guys you think are absolutely indestructible, that's the place where the like life suddenly changes. And I said, that's fascinating. And what do you do? And he said, we do exactly the same thing, which is when someone is drifted from stretch, which is where we want them, into stress, which is where we don't want them for too long, we bring them back, and we do it kind of almost like biomechanically. We will reach out, we'll physically touch them, and then we'll speak to them very, very softly and reassure them and just dial down their central nervous system until they're back into a stretched position, but not a stressed position. And then they
Yeah.
can begin to refunction, and then we'll get them onto the next stage, which absolutely blew my mind, and has been part of the inspiration. I mean, I absolutely do not do that to people, but on our organized adventure retreats, we make it such that it is a stretch. Like it's
Yeah.
not a holiday, but we never put anybody in a situation, well, we never put them in any danger, real danger, and we never put them in a situation which is actually too uncomfortable for them. But circling back then, in terms of like the bits and pieces that you went through, whether in training exercises or elsewhere, like what's one, give me an example of something that is a real push, like an uncomfortable push for you.
Um, I'll give you. I'll follow on with that. Actually, it's almost like the opposite of that. The danger to having such a high threshold for pain and
Yeah,
such a high threshold for not physical pain. You know,
a
I'm a wuss with
discomfort.
that. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, discomfort. Yeah, yeah. Is you don't realize when you're going too far and you're pushing too far. And actually, that can cause, stress comes out in various different ways in your life and, in your body and, everything around you. And yeah, that was the thing when I kind of like left the military and grew businesses. I was, the question, it was always, the answer is yes, what's the question? And I was
Mhm.
pushing and pushing and pushing, when I was starting in property, if there was a issue, a shower was leaking at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, I would be there at 10 past 10
Mhm.
with my mastic, trying to solve it, trying to fix it, watching YouTube how to fix something and doing it. So yeah, that created like this momentum and probably a level of success that I achieved. But the downside was, I was a bit chunkier and I wasn't really doing as much of the stuff that I loved. I just did it because it needed doing rather than because I loved to do it.
Mhm. Definitely. I mean, that sounds very familiar, and I think people listening will find that familiar. I think, speaking only for myself, Nick, not for you, I've been horrendously burnt out on
Mhm.
various occasions over, the decades that I've been in business and work. And it comes from that one, like being on a mission, like just being so obsessed by something that I want to achieve that kind of everything blurs, it's just that one thing. Um, and working through exhaustion, working through profound periods of stress, which now I'm a little ever so slightly older and wiser, I realize, there's a lot to be saying for doing sprints, but
Yeah.
realizing that they're sprints. If you're treating, as I used to do, everything like a sprint, but in fact it's a marathon,
Mhm.
tactically that's quite a poor decision because that something's going to give in, isn't it?
Yeah.
We might get back to that kind of towards the end, actually. We'll come back to that. So when you left the army, when you handed in your resignation, um, what was the process then? So I'm interested in what do people say to you when that happens, and what's the process or for the exit?
Um, Interestingly, if you're doing okay and you think you're well liked and you've got job opportunities coming to you, you'd expect people to say, hang on, no, 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 try and talk you around.
Hmm.
And guess what? That never happened, which is I'm cool about, I don't have an issue. You very much you think you're very important and you think your knowledge and your qualifications are very important, but it's a big organization and it
Hmm.
carries on going. Was it better for me leaving or being there? Don't know. You can argue. Depends what
Hmm.
perspective you're at. But you kind of like enter a process. I've ummed and ahed and actually I volunteered for a redundancy to leave and it gave me kind of like a bounce about 100 grand, soft cushion to
Fantastic.
hop. So yeah, can you see why, without that, I'd have been like probably
Hmm.
ummed and ahed, but I was thinking, that's going to be life-changing money,
Hmm.
um, which, it felt like at the time. And then as soon as you get into property development, you're like, what? 100 grand, yeah, it's gone. So so I sat in front of a fax machine. At the thing had to be in by 10 o'clock at night, and it was literally 9:57, and
Hmm.
sat and put the fax through. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to do it. And then you hop into resettlement, and the resettlement was okay. I had a few kind of like pounds to spend on that. So I actually qualified as an electrician. I did some lean and Six Sigma kind of like management training,
Hmm.
and had a chunk of leave as well. So once I put my notice in, I actually realistically had about 4 months, even though it's a 12-month process.
Hmm.
I had
Is
4 months of
it,
work, and then yeah,
it's interesting there isn't an exit interview in the way that you do in corporate life. That's fascinating. I wonder if that will evolve over time because presumably that you could get quite a lot of information in that interview. But I mean, when I left corporate life on two occasions, it's the one was the come in, close the door. Um, you're ruining
yeah,
a perfectly good career, Paul. What do you think you're doing? Like quite confrontational, but meant in the nicest spirit, I would guess.
yeah,
And the other one was, they're like the chief exec. When you see that number come from your phone, you think, God, I really must be in trouble now. Wishing me well and saying like, so well, just explain this to me, Paul. Like, why are we doing this? And I explained, I want to go into property. But we're doing it successfully for a while. Feels like that's the direction. And he said, well, when I can get that, but when you change your mind, just give me a call and we can come back and we'll see what we can do for you. So quite sweet, quite almost parental, I suppose, in a way.
I actually weaned myself of it because when I left regular with the resettlement,
Mhm.
I actually the next day I signed back on when I left and got a re-enlistment bonus to go into the Army Reserve.
Oh, good call, I'd say that is. And also,
Yeah,
as a citizen of the UK, I would say that's highly beneficial, isn't it? Because that's recycling our skill, our talent, our investment. Like more power to
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So,
And it was a nice transition to business because I would turn up, and I worked for the officer training, uh university officer training corps,
mhm,
and which is kind of the militant wing of the university. I mean, it's a great organization, really
mhm,
good. You can earn a bit of money and get some life skills on the way. And I it was a nice transition, so I could do a day or two a week, something like that, add a little bit of value, to kind of the youth, and also gave me space to build businesses.
mhm. Very good. And so you obviously had your qualifications as an electrician. So why property? And what was that? Those initial, let's say, first 5 years. I defy anybody who tells me they're not difficult. Um, what were those initial? So why property? How did you kind of get the wheels moving? What were those first few years like in property?
Yeah, I was laughing at you saying I'm an electrician. Oh gosh, yeah, I have the qualifications. I don't have a clue. I started doing one rewire for a family friend, and I was under the floorboards, and I took the like normally under your front door as you walk in, there's a patch to get, like panel to get under the thing, and I had that out, and I was under the door, like under the floor working, and the guy opened the door and stepped in, didn't look down, and fell down the hole. And it
God.
was, yeah, yeah. So yeah, that kind of, I was like, yeah, this electrician stuff's not really for me. Yeah, property was, I kind of took this offensive eagerness and ability to get stuff done, and this this kind of like ruthlessly consistency, I call it, into kind of like property and business. And I was very much, I'll buy a property. Someone on the electrician's course, actually. A guy called Harry was
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, I'm doing this and I'm doing these HMOs.
Mhm.
And, this was in like 2012 or something like that.
Yeah.
HMOs were a newfangled thing at that point.
Mhm.
And he was doing radical things, like instead of painting the walls magnolia, he was painting them white.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah. So I was chatting to Harry about this, and they introduced me to some bits of training, and I was like, yeah, I'll have a go. Obviously, Rich Dad Poor Dad,
Mhm.
has a lot to answer for. That was the
Mhm.
first book I read, and handily it was yeah, I kind of tried to live by it as I do now. So uh properties, grew buying, a little bit of property myself. I had a little bit of seed capital that I talked about. And then people started saying, oh, can you do that for me?
Mhm.
And I was like, yep. So I started kind of sourcing, and I was doing the refurbishments myself. And then I was like, oh, I'll get some tradesmen in.
Mhm.
And I grew that in the first 5 years. I sourced a lot of properties, into the hundreds of properties. And then the byproduct of that was tenants. So I was like, well, okay, I'll try self-managing, got to about 70 tenants, then handed it over to some agents and they messed it up. So, and then I was like, well, I'll try another way. I partnered with someone, that didn't
Mhm.
work. So then brought it all in-house. Construction was a byproduct. Furnishing, interior design was a byproduct. So everything within that ecosystem was kind of I needed to solve the need.
Mhm.
I actually went a little bit beyond as well. I had kind of a couple of business partners. There was four of us to start, and then kind of went our way separate ways. And for example, our accountants were rubbish,
Mhm.
and we were like, "What do we do?
Mhm.
Go to another accountant. Go to another accountant." So we set up an accountancy firm and grew that. We had all sorts of businesses, all over the world as well. We had a partner in a little office in Hong Kong. We were franchising our kind of like sourcing, investment, construction business stuff. So yeah, this was just the first 5 years as well. It was a crazy time.
And look, you've got a full, for those who can't see Nick on the podcast, he's got a full head of hair. I don't know how this has been sustained. Um,
Yeah, exactly. Tell me about it's grey though. So
so,
yeah.
so I'm keen to like bring us up to the present day and talk about kind of your current ecosystem. But I
Hmm.
suppose the question that's top of mind there is you've done a big variety of things in that, from your own portfolio, refurbishments as a discipline and task, lettings, which is a whole world in its own, and not for the faint-hearted. Um, the construction, the development side of things, which again
Yeah.
is a completely different discipline. I think, people often
Yeah.
think that it's all part of the same, buy to let game. It's not. It's like completely starting. It's like applying for a new job. It's like getting a new career.
Yeah.
If you were to, I don't know what the fairest. I do want to make sure this is a fair question for you. It's like if you were to two questions, you can pick which one you want to answer. If you were to start again, what would you do differently? Or if you would prefer not to answer that question, I would say if somebody in their 20s was starting again today, what path would you recommend they go down, or what things would you invite them to think about?
Yeah, great question. I, I think by having a go at lots of things, and did relatively well financially. They kind of tended to work out, apart from a few of the developments, but that's developments. And majority of the businesses were kind of positive rather than negative. I would say network was the key aspect of that. Each of these businesses was not me. I am not an accountant. I am not a general builder. I'm
Mhm.
not a letting agency, letting agent. So having the right talent and skill set around you is very, very important. So build that, because it takes 20 years to grow a 20-year relationship.
Mhm.
And if you can go to people with an open hand and wanting to learn. My first year, I remember doing the tax return, and I'd spent something like £1,800 on coffee.
God.
It was probably the point we met as well, actually, because our past, were very
Yeah, yeah,
early. We were hopping into it about the same kind of time, maybe 2013-ish or something like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, network's really key. Obviously, your skill set and making sure you have the right skills that are transferable into the businesses. For example, you need to understand finance and flow of finance.
Mhm.
You need to understand marketing and the psychology of marketing and
Mhm.
sales and people. They're really, really key. Um, you need to understand probably the operational delivery of what you're what you're offering, and
Mhm.
what you're doing. So there's a lot more, but I would say focusing on those bits is really, really important. So the upskilling, the networking, and then having a go,
Mhm.
because action always outperforms
Mhm.
inaction. So having a go, but make sure it's kind of sandboxed, so it's not too detrimental. The challenge you have as you grow is everyone tries to take it off you as you get
Mhm.
more, whether it's the government, whether it's like something happens or a contract goes wrong, or
Mhm.
there's a technical legal issue or something like that. So it's how you can protect your kind of wealth as you grow it. And then yeah, what else? I would say the final aspect of, to answer that question is who you choose as partners.
Yeah.
Life and business partners, probably the single biggest impact on your entire success and happiness.
I could not agree more. I could not agree more. It is the biggest determining factor. I think it's pretty well recognized in the literature as well that, for example, who you marry has a massive impact on your future thing. And in property and in business, those are really careful decisions that need to be made. And there's this inverse correlation sometimes, isn't there, between people's following and their competence, and
Yeah,
that's something that we all discover, unfortunately, in this world, and it's worth thinking about. I want to get into the here and now, but before
yeah.
I do, final question, just to completely close off the military background, is what is it that you learn, in combat, in theatre, in that world that translates or transfers into your business life?
Um, I'm really chill
Okay.
when there's bombs and bullets going on. The saying is you pause, take a knee, and look around.
Hmm.
And each one of my coaching clients have that, actually, where I'm like, right, whatever's going on, the problem's not the problem. We pause, we take a knee, look around. For those of you old enough to remember, it's called the Condor moment,
Hmm.
where there was like a TV advert that was like smoking a Condor
Okay.
cigar while there was
Yeah.
something crazy going on. I think it was fishing or something. But yeah, the idea is yeah, that really, really helped me to not make decisions based on emotion.
Hmm. Very good. Very useful. I was thinking about this question before we got on the call, and I was thinking, what did I learn in legal practice that would transfer? And I
Yeah,
think I think it was like three different things. It was time, like be on time, like where you put
mhm,
your body communicates a lot to the world. So time, in the context of like, if you're charging like 500 quid an hour to sit down with a client, like being 2 minutes late is a big deal because
yeah,
it tells them a lot about, what your priorities are. Um, Focus. So I'm a big advocate of people reading contracts. And the contract I would urge people to read at the moment is their mortgage offers,
mhm,
because we're obviously seeing, understandably, this exodus from the UK. But I have noticed in my mortgage offers that they all say if you leave the UK, um, this loan is effectively going to be called in. You need to keep your assets in the UK. And I've never noticed that before, but because it's kind of the current thing, isn't it? So I've been
yeah.
reading mortgage offers very carefully. And something that you said, interestingly, in terms of how you got to Sandhurst, my third one is preparation. Uh, there is nothing finer than over preparation. Like if you want something to go well, is to
Yeah.
have read everything, understood everything before you walk in. It just makes like an absolute game changer. So there,
I agree with all of those, actually. Really, really powerful, because it's kind of how you do. anything's how you do everything, how you do everything's how you do anything. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you get the
yeah,
saying, and I've been creating. I mean, I've been trying not to use military terms, like, and quite often I'm not quite sure whether it is or it isn't.
yeah,
But creating what I'm called like the core operating system. My business is called Core Business, Core Coaching, and
yeah,
the core OS is a load of frameworks and SOP, standard
mhm,
operating procedures for each of these things.
yeah,
So it's how like making your bed in the morning type stuff,
definitely.
which
I,
is
I,
yeah,
and I think having like standing operating procedures in all aspects of life is really helpful, whether it's like food, gym, married life.
hmm,
So Liz and I, for example, have like uh, a particular catch-up session that we do every week, which I think has really
yep.
stood us in good stead, that allowed us to remain in communication through, all the challenges of parenting and all that stuff. So got one on the time and conscious to get into the here and now. So what's the ecosystem look like now? I mean, talk us through broadly like what's going on in your world from your businesses and that kind of thing.
Yeah, cool. So I kind of exited most of the things that I've described. Right now, I'm focusing on consultancy work, so one-to-one business coaching. Within that ecosystem, there's mergers and acquisitions going on. There's lots of marketing chat. That seems to be the theme, and a little bit of property bits and bobs within there. But ultimately, people are either trying to grow their business, exit their business, or like grow some wealth, from the pots that they've already cash that they've already got. So yeah, that takes up a little bit of my time, and the consultancy work's fun, really
Mhm.
interesting. Having done so much property over the years, it's kind of just a box, and you just like, yeah, do the thing and move it on. I mean, I think it's a beautiful vehicle for storage of wealth, and
Mhm.
like maybe makes a little bit of money every now and again if you're lucky. But it's nice. So I have that going on. I've still got my property management business that does a bit of investment stuff, overseas investors. I'm doing a bit of other, investment bits as well, mostly kind of currency, forexy type trading stuff, which is interesting. And I've got my event, which is Leeds based, Property Catalyst Club.
Mhm.
There's a real need, for having people in a room,
Mhm.
and struggle to find events that I really enjoy going to. So I thought I'll create one, and that's what the Property Catalyst Club's about. I know you've been a couple of times. You
It,
spoke at
it,
one actually, didn't you?
it's a great event. I would highly recommend people seek Nick out and give it a go and see if it's right for them. It's a great event. You do this little slot, and I've always enjoy your slots. I particularly enjoyed the last one you did, where you talked about, and I'm not going to get this right, but a potential interesting niche could be around agricultural land. Do you want to just give us
Mhm.
like a sentence on that? I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, I'm just the niche was about the opportunities I see in the current property world, and it was
Mhm.
mixed residential, commercial, stuff with simple planning gains. But the Class Q agricultural, permitted development rights
Mhm.
make it simpler to convert agricultural buildings to residential.
Mhm.
And if you've got the stuff in the right area, you can
Mhm.
convert it to the right standard, and you have multiple exit options. That's I think what's working in property right now. Obviously a tricky market because it's gusting, and it's price expectations are still high. Lenders are, think they're lower. Who
Mhm.
knows what's going on?
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what I see as an opportunity.
It really piqued my interest only because, well, not only because, but also because I hadn't heard a single other person on the face of the planet mention that. So it's fascinating. Um, so then talk to us about like give us a life lesson. So one of the things I ask people on the podcast is to give us a life lesson, and um, the story is important because that's how we
Mhm.
learn. But what I'm most interested in for the purposes of the podcast is what did you learn from it? And therefore, what can me and everybody listening to the podcast can learn from it? So give us a life lesson, Nick.
I would say most things have been done before. Like plagiarism is not a dirty word. We can, we can find a path that we've, been down, unless you put in, Teslas on the, Mars or something like that. But still, might have been done a long time ago. So an exercise I do with my coaching clients is, we come up with a bit of a business plan, 12-month plan. That's all I prefer to plan out to 12 months. I think that's enough, with a bit of a concept beyond. And the business, the idea is I say, well, why don't we look at this and come up with a 100-year business plan? And everyone's face goes, what? I'm like, well, yeah, let's come up with what success would like look like in 100 years. And then they're like, well, I don't want that success. I want it quicker. I'm like, okay, so we go, why? Why do we want it quicker? What does that lead to? And that leads us through to the answer. Most people want what they see, but because there's instant gratification, they're scrolling, comparing, even if it's subconsciously. So if you can extend the horizon of what you're looking to achieve, what you want, if you want to be a multimillionaire, or if you want to help 1,000 kids somewhere, or whatever your kind of life goal is, if you can say, well, let's slightly increase that number and extend the time, I think you'll make better decisions and you'll get closer to what you actually want.
That is so interesting. That is so interesting. I once heard an anarchist say something similar, but for different reasons. So, bearing this person is an anarchist. His take on it was the best form of governance is actually kings and queens. And he was like, okay, mate, you're an anarchist, so what the hell are you talking about? He goes, well, because they think 100 years ahead. So they're making long-term decisions that they're willing for their grandchildren to endure if they get it wrong, as opposed to the 4 or 5 year cycle that we have, which is just let's have a go, and we're not going to be around to face the consequences, so we can kind of go a bit mental. So that's interesting. Think a long way out. That is fascinating.
you can
Okay.
still you can still have the speed, so we can go, right, okay, what's the 100-year plan?
Yeah.
How can we achieve that in a year?
Yeah.
But the idea is we're still thinking that far out, because I think you make better decisions, you get to the truer reason, the truer version of what you're looking for. Most people, it's either legacy, freedom, and choice. That's the most, the root of most answers. And actually, yeah, like the legacy side, I don't think it tends to be correct. I think if you go deeper, actually you're doing that because you feel, that there's something deeper in your past or your upbringing or something like that, which makes you feel like you should say that.
Hmm. That's interesting. I think I've learned about legacy. I wanted a mentor who kind of told me off because I was a bit obsessed by legacy, and he was like, that's not necessarily what your kids need.
Yeah.
Um, and I've really kind of reflected upon that, and I think I don't want to like date the podcast, but obviously, the current administration is thinking about making pretty substantial changes to the way that assets can be transferred through generations. And obviously, those that can afford it will no doubt put in place expensive tax structures, and then, the rest of the population won't.
Yeah.
Um, what the realization I have had about that, which makes me less animated about it, is that it's really the transfer of knowledge that is the most important thing. There are things that we can teach our children that no amount of money can ever replace it, or because it allows them just to immediately see life in a different way. So
Yeah.
it's that transfer of knowledge which is perhaps the more important thing.
You teach your children tends to be by doing. If you can teach them your version of right and wrong and instill some values in them.
Mhm.
And then the technical bits, the technical knowledge, you also have to allow them to make mistakes. You have to
Yeah,
allow them to fall,
yeah,
controlled environment-esque, which
mhm.
is which is difficult.
Yeah, definitely. That is a tricky one. Um, so health is wealth. So, we've been out for a walk together. You've got a fine walking pace. You clearly enjoy the outdoors as much as I do. Um, so, when you think about health as well, give us some of your 1 to 3 top rituals for physical and mental resilience.
Oh yeah, brilliant. I'm in the process of trimming at the moment, so measure what you treasure. I'm kind of weighing myself every day, and this concept of trying to eat as clean as possible. I think it means different things at different points of your life. When
Mhm,
you are in, like turbo busy accumulation mode, it's food is fuel. But
mhm,
then as soon as you can kind of slow down and make good choices, and the challenge I think we have in terms of a ritual is where you get your information from.
mhm,
What is healthy for us to eat?
mhm,
Who knows?
mhm,
Like some people might say some things because of this and that. So I try to be conscious of what goes in, really simple things like sleep hygiene, kind of like hydration. I'm a massive advocate for instead of guessing how you feel, go and get measured. So go and have, your bloods done,
mhm,
because then as a matter of fact, like this is exactly the supplement I need to take, and this is exactly the process of that. So I do a bit of supplements. Like I don't eat much fish. I take cod liver oil,
mhm,
take NMN, and then I take a multivitamin as well, which is not that great, but it's a broad spectrum. It, it,
mhm,
it covers everything. Try and lift a couple of times a week, and keep my steps up,
mhm,
and that's it. And also I would say making sure I have turnaround days is really important for health. So if I know I've got a busier period or I'm traveling or something like that, I'll always try and have a turnaround day, which is what I call it. So my diary is turnaround day, and
mhm,
it's a just gives me that chance to reset.
mhm. That sounds very wise. Um, So you mentioned apps there, and so I would say there's a handful, like less than a handful of apps that have really changed my life. And I've got a really good friend who is absolutely wonderful, and she tells me this is very much a boy thing, Paul. I was like, okay, good, because I use Fitbit to track all of my steps. I
Yeah,
use
yeah,
MyFitnessPal to track my
yep.
macros. I have a meditation app, and somewhere in there I get my sleep tracked as well. And to me, I totally, she makes a really good, valid point, which is you want to listen to your body, you want to use your intuition, and clearly she's right. Okay, so like 100% right, but you know for me, it does help me to see the data. It's like, okay. And then to kind of cross-check that to how I'm feeling. So do you subscribe to any of that? Do you have particular apps that you use that you think have actually genuinely made a difference to your well-being?
Yeah, and the bit beyond is I'm taking the data and sticking it into ChatGPT as well
No way.
to give me some real interesting feedback of look at this and think about this. So I've actually just changed from my Apple Watch back to a Samsung thing, just because I'm sick of charging the battery every day on the Apple Watch. So this lasts a little bit longer. Yeah, I use MyFitnessPal. I've got a really, really good gym app. Let me tell you what it's called. It's called Gymverse, and it's
Mhm.
expensive, but training wise, fantastic. I can put in, I've got a rotator cuff injury here, and and actually it gives me really fantastic training routines. Also measures every lift, every weight. A couple of days ago, I lifted the weight of an elephant in a lifting session, which I know is
Oh, I love
most
that.
people do, but little bits like that.
Is that the app that gives you that signal and says you've lifted 3 lions today, or you've lifted, 100 penguins or something? I love that. I once worked with an
Brilliant.
amazing guy called John Maggs who helped me lose, the best part of 4 stone, and that was one of the methodologies he used, and I thought it was brilliant. That was really good, really like funny and rewarding at the same time.
I with this stuff, I can't wait till there's an implant or something like that in the back of my neck. 'Cause I don't like jewelry, and don't really like stuff in my hands. But you've got to have something. Whoop is phenomenal. I know lots of clients that use that. It's not something I subscribe to, but as long as you're tracking it and you're going, well, how much sleep, what kind of quality sleep am I having, and
Mhm.
and you're looking. Yeah, like I use a company called Medichecks, to do my bloods, but then Bluecrest and Bupa, and lots of. It doesn't cost a lot of money, but that's really good, and that gets inputted into ChatGPT as well. And actually, it means that the micro changes I can track
Mhm.
using AI.
I think I'm going to start putting my data into AI. I'll let you know how I get on. You're
Phenomenal.
very well read, Nick. I've we've chatted about books over the years. Is there a particular book that's front of mind for you at the moment in terms of that you think would be a useful thing to share with this audience?
Yeah, I've normally got one or two on the go at once. I'm redoing The Psychology of Money, which,
Mhm.
I'll try and do at least every couple of years. That's really, really powerful. I've
Yeah.
really enjoyed I want to get his name right. I think it's Richard Harpin, the guy who founded HomeServe. This, he owns, I think, Checker Trade now and a few other bits, but it's something like the 7 steps to be a billionaire or something along the lines of that.
Mhm.
I've really enjoyed that book actually, really, really interesting. And then I've got a really simple one on the go as well, which is the rules to success. I quite like short, sharp.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like Richard Templar. And this is a really easy, I can read one page in the morning, a bit like the Daily Stoic.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And it
That
just
it,
makes me there's nothing radical, there's nothing majorly new in that. So I like stories, but then I like short sharp inputs, technical. I rarely read, I normally listen to stuff.
yeah. Yeah. I think there's something pretty profound about, what that first input you give yourself is in the morning, rather than necessarily staring into a screen, but a
Yeah.
page of something. You've mentioned it, the Daily Stoic. So I love the Daily Stoic.
Hmm.
And I think that first input that we give ourselves is really profound. And I think, as we all know, everything compounds. So either
Yeah.
compounds positively or negatively.
It's
Um,
normally about having an action off the back of it. That's the key to all of this. So my hack is if I read something I really like, I normally put it in my diary.
mhm,
So if I'm like, oh, schedule this time, I'll do it straight away. So if I don't, it's gone.
mhm. Are you a journaler? Do you use journals?
I go in and out of journaling. I'm quite, if I'm outside, I self-soothe. That's how I process.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, as long as I go for a wander or have a bit of time, by myself, that's how I can process. And I'm definitely a list maker. I have
Mhm,
a list of lists, and I, it's understanding is important, but for me, it's about being very action orientated. And
mhm,
that's the thing that's probably really accelerated everything that I've done. That I always default to doing something.
mhm. Definitely. Forward movement helps
Hmm.
things. And I think that thing of spending time in nature, I mean, it's the thing that I probably bang on the most about, both at retreats and in different contexts as well, in that, in the world of AI, in the world of unlimited technology, in the world of unlimited connectivity, a lot of the solutions we're looking for are found in the natural world.
Yeah.
My like main retreat is the most analog retreat on the face of the planet. There's nothing digital about it. Um,
Hmm.
because I think that's where the solutions are. And I suppose I'm only, as we always are, I'm only speaking for myself in that, we're all speaking to ourselves.
No, no, no. I see it as a theme. I would say most of my one-to-one clients, I class them as group them as what I call high performers, people that are
Mhm.
doing stuff, and they
Yeah.
might have train sets, of like different businesses and properties and stuff. But yeah, it's a theme that we talk about quite regularly of how can you slow down to speed up? It's that kind of like fast thinking, slow thinking,
Hmm.
concept. And the idea is I feel like there's a movement to being low tech.
Hmm.
You know, I don't think I would necessarily go back to a Nokia, but yeah, there's certainly something about how you can having unplugged time, you
Hmm.
make better decisions. If you think about it, your business decisions, your life decisions, the best decisions come when you're in the shower
Hmm.
or you're going for a surf or you're
Hmm.
going for a wander or whatever your thing is. Um, and then the idea I think successful people, really do is they make sure they are deliberate in their approach to that.
Hmm.
So I have a list of decisions that I need to make. So when I
Hmm.
go out for a walk, I'll pull up my notes app and I'll be like, right, okay, I'll think about that and see if I
Hmm.
can get to a decision.
Hmm. A friend of mine has this sort of saying that there's no problem that can't be solved but by a walk. You
Yeah.
know, and she's a very wise woman, so I believe in that. So, bring things to a conclusion. Like, what's next for you? What and you can take take whichever version of this question you like. But what's next is one way of putting it. Probably my favorite way of putting it is, what are you optimizing for right now? What's
hmm
most important for you?
I've just had a fantastic year. We've spent the year down in Cornwall, which has been just amazing. The epitome of environment dictates performance.
Mhm.
Um, I could actually live the rest of my life doing exactly what I do right now.
Nice.
So I'm always looking at, protection and diversification, and like you kind of alluded to, where would you want to live? How would you want to live? Who would you want around you? Versus how do you stay tax efficient? Like stay ahead of inflation.
Mhm.
You know, if you're not growing, you're dying in business.
Mhm.
But yeah, I feel like I've got this perfect ecosystem. Marketing's high on my mind at the moment. I'm looking at looking at that, and whether that comes into a collaboration or a purchase for marketing business or something like that. That's on my mind.
Mhm.
But at the moment, yeah, I think I've got it cracked, man.
Good.
Which yeah, I'm blessed around. What's interesting is I almost feel guilty for that. You sat there and you're like, yeah, everything seems to be working okay. I could always do a little bit more here and there, but you know, I've got over that guilt of, you know, making it, and yeah, I just want to carry on.
And I think that is a perennial challenge for entrepreneurs, is the guilt of, if you're not redlining it, you mustn't be working hard enough, everything will come to an end, and all of that
Yeah.
nonsense that goes on. I was speaking to a group of people, my inner circle group, about this last Friday, and it is just a different world, and input hours and hard work are necessary, but they also do not necessarily correlate to what the output is. Like, sometimes the best thing to do is to have some time out to think clearly about the next decision and then make a really good decision, rather than overwork a problem to death when you're just not in a position to solve it. Um,
hmm
if people have enjoyed this podcast, as I'm sure they have, if you have enjoyed the podcast, it makes an absolutely enormous difference if you subscribe to the podcast, you like the podcast, or you leave a comment or a review. I can't tell you the difference that's made, and it's really fantastic. Thank you so much for everybody who's doing that. It's really making a big difference. If people have enjoyed this, Nick, which I'm sure they have, I what should I put in these show notes? Typically, I put people's LinkedIn profiles. Do you want your a LinkedIn profile popped into the show notes? Is that the best thing to do?
Yeah, whatever you want. Anything social media wise is fine. But yeah, LinkedIn is good. Instagram and Facebook and whatever else there is. But yeah,
Fantastic.
that's good. And then I'll stick you my website information, because if you contact me on there, that gives access to everything else really.
Yeah, amazing. Well, look, thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for coming on the
Thanks,
podcast.
buddy.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers, man.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's the Property and Investor podcast. As I say, please do like, subscribe, comment on the podcast, because it makes such a big difference to all the algorithms on all the different platforms. We're going to be back next week with another podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Take very good care of yourselves, and we'll see you very soon.